Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how I changed the front brake pads on a 2008 Suzuki Reno. My name's How To Bob and we're ready to get started. First thing I'm going to do is take some brake disc quiet, and what I do is smear that on each brake pad first thing. That way it gives it some time to dry. And once I put a little small bead along there, I'll take it and smear it around with my finger so that it gets a nice even coat of brake disc quiet. Next thing I'm going to talk about safety. You want a wheel chock underneath the rear tire, and then we can jack the vehicle up. You can see the little notch in the front. That's where the jack goes. And we jack it up just high enough so that it's off the ground. Okay, now that I have it off the ground, I can remove the wheel cover. And to do that, I use a 3/4 inch socket, and I can loosen these up by hand. They're just on there for decoration and to hold the wheel cover on, so they come off fairly easy by hand, or you can use a socket if you have to. And then I just pry it off the rest of the way. Then I'm going to use my impact driver and take off the 4 lug nuts and pull the tire off. You can see it's a little rusty around there, so I'm going to spray a little WD-40 to help me get this off of the hub. Once I get that on there and wobble back and forth, it comes right off. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put a screwdriver in between the pad and the rotor to separate it just a little bit. And then I'm going to use my 14mm socket to loosen up the calipers so that I can remove the brake pads. Once I get that loosened up, I'm going to get a coat hanger, and the coat hanger is going to be hooked on the caliper, and then it gets hooked into the spring on the car to hold it so that the hose does not get damaged from the weight of the caliper hanging on it. Okay, now that I have the coat hanger wrapped around the caliper pretty tight, I can go ahead and hook it on the spring, and that should hold it in place until I get done changing out my brake pads. So I'm going to use a brake caliper spreading tool, and what that does is just spread the calipers apart. Basically, you can use a channel lock, a C clamp, or anything that you can do to push these apart, because your new pads are going to be a lot thicker than your worn out old pads. So now I'm going to push the old pads out, and you can see there's a little thing on the top here, and what that does is rub on the rotor, and that's what causes a squealing noise to let you know that your brakes are getting towards the end. You can see this one's a lot thicker, still has the little warning lever on there. So I'm going to go ahead and take both off there and get those out of the way. Now I'm going to put some brake grease in the little channels here. This is where the brake pads slide in and out, so I want to make sure that that operation happens very good. So I put some grease on there. You want to make sure you don't get any grease on the rotor or on the face of the pads, and I'll smear it around a little bit with my finger. It doesn't take much, but it does help to have brake grease just on the moving parts. You don't want to put it on the rotor or on the face of the pads, and I'll smear it around the channels real good. And then I will take my pad, and you can see the little notch goes right in where I put the grease, and I just slide that in the channel, work it in, push it all the way up against the rotor, and that should take care of the inside one. Now same thing for the outside pad, just put it in the channel, and the other channel you can see here slides right in, and you can see they slide in and out. So now I'm going to use Loctite on my caliper bolts before I put those back in, so I can make sure that they stay in place. I'm going to go ahead and unhook my caliper and slide it on around the new brake pads, and this might be a little tight because they are brand new and they are the thickest that they will ever be. But if you work it back and forth and gently slide it in, you should be able to get the caliper around the new brake pads with a little slotted flat washer on the end that you have to make sure that's right. And now I've got my Loctite on here. I can go ahead and thread the bolts in by hand, and I always want to start them out by hand so I don't cross thread them. Once I get them started by hand, I can go ahead and use my 14mm socket to tighten them up the rest of the way. And the Loctite should hold them in place. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put the tire back on. Just match up all 4 lug nuts with the hole in the rim. And then again, once you get the tire back on, you want to make sure that you put the lug nuts on by hand. If you have a impact wrench, you want to use that later, but you want to make sure that you get them on. Get the lug nuts on first by hand so you don't cross thread or strip out any of the lug nuts. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my lug nuts in a cross pattern. Once I get all the lug nuts tightened, I'm going to go ahead and put my cover back on. You can see the valve stem matches right up. And just tap that into place. And then I can use my 3/4 inch socket to tighten the plastic decorative lug nuts to hold the wheel cover on. Okay, now that I have my plastic lug nuts tightened, I can go ahead and lower the car, and then I want to pump my brakes to make sure that I got them working correctly. And this is how you change the brakes in a 2008 Suzuki Reno. This is How To Bob. Thanks for watching.